Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar, SharePoint File Migration. Today, we're going to dive into a complex migrations case study that illustrates all of the steps you need to take when moving to a common SharePoint file system. If your situation is not that complex, don't worry. We're going to be going through the steps for any migration, and we will be sharing practical illustrations and examples of challenges you can overcome. And we're going to talk about why it makes economic sense to move from a file server to a cloud-based product like SharePoint, and why it also makes sense to consolidate your systems if you have developed ad hoc over time and have multiple file sharing platforms that may take time from your staff and make them less effective at their work. Of course, accessing files remotely involves security best practices too, and we know that any migration is a really big change with a lot of impacts. So we'll also talk about change management to help your migration be more successful. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT, and I'm the moderator today. I'm very, very happy to hear from our experts. So Norwin, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Norwin Herrera. I'm the IT Business Manager Team Lead, and I've been in Community IT for 3.5 years.
Yes, I'm Robin Harris. I'm a Cloud Technology Engineer here at Community IT. That means basically I work on migration projects, helping our clients move from whatever platform they're on into SharePoint.
All right, so our learning objectives for today are to learn about SharePoint and what it can do, and learn the best steps and best practices for a SharePoint migration project, and to discuss change management tips. All right, so I'm going to move on to talk a little bit more about SharePoint and how it fits in the context of other Microsoft Office products. So this graphic I love. It's a periodic table of Microsoft products. No wonder people get overwhelmed. It's a little bit overwhelming. You can see SharePoint and OneDrive are here in this part of the illustration. We're going to talk about OneDrive in a little bit. And you can see this layer of documents you may be more familiar with. You can create and work on Word documents, Excel, PowerPoint. So it used to be that when you created, worked on, or saved, for example, a Word document, you saved it locally to your own computer. And if you remember, you used to have to hit save to make sure that your work was saved. Or then you maybe saved it locally in your office on a server that maybe lived in a weird closet full of computer stuff. Maybe there was a fan or special air conditioning in there. So when we all move to working in the cloud online, those files still need to be shared somewhere. So in Microsoft's universe, they are stored and shared in SharePoint, which is shared folders. So a little history, Microsoft first thought of SharePoint as a way to create websites. So some of the terminology still sounds like you're making a website. From the beginning, you could create a SharePoint site with permissions just for an internal audience, almost like an intranet, or you could make it be public as a website. And it quickly became apparent that since Microsoft had made it so easy to store files in internal websites, companies could just use SharePoint just to share files, not whether or not they thought of it as an internal website. And that functionality kind of took over the tool. But some of the way Microsoft talks about SharePoint can still sound like you're using it to build websites. So that adds a little bit to the confusion in the lingo. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about what SharePoint does. So you can create, store, and share content on the web from wherever you are. It is cloud-based. It's accessible from anywhere. You can share files within your organization or with people outside of your organization, giving them permission to edit or just to view. And you can share files and or work collaboratively using email, using the share link capability that's in the file itself. But there are some things that SharePoint is not very good at doing. So Robin, you want to talk about some of the things that it's not great at?
Right. So SharePoint is not good at storing database content like your financial software, such as QuickBooks, larger files, media files, Adobe InDesign, Revit, CAD, for example. Getting all the colleagues consistently using SharePoint and OneDrive also requires commitment and training.
Exactly. So I think that's one of the things we run into a lot is even if the tool is technically working, getting people using it can be a struggle for nonprofits. Right. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about how you share files in SharePoint. So giving an example of the PowerPoint that I created for this webinar and that we were sharing on SharePoint to work on it collaboratively, Robin and Norwin and I. So on your file, you'll see several features across the top. And if you're confused about any of these functions, it can be a good idea to ask around at your organization. So you may have a colleague who's really good at SharePoint who can answer your questions. You may have some training materials that you missed. You can Google it if you have questions. So we're just going to cover basics around file sharing today. But one of the good and bad things about SharePoint is that it's really customizable. So your own instance of SharePoint may have some quirks. It might look a little different than this, but in general, here are some of the basics. So at the top, you'll see that your file is shared and saved, and you can click on that link to see where the file is located. So it'll show you the parent folder. You can also see previous versions of it. So if you need to wind back, you did something that you want to undo, or there's a previous version that you think is better, you can click on that link and see them. Also at the top left of the top bar, you'll see that autosave is turned on. Every once in a while, you'll see it kind of whirring along, and that means it's saving a version. So you don't have to keep clicking save every time you change something. And then at the top right, you'll see there's a button to share the file. So you can choose who to share it with and how to share it. So you can share it as a link. You can put an email in there and send it directly to the person that you want to share it with via email. You can you can send a copy, and you can also create a link, a URL, and you can make a copy of that and share that. So you could share that through an email that you write, or you could share it on Teams with your colleagues there, or anywhere that you wanted to share a URL. So here's where you see that you can make that link. And then once you click on that, it'll open it, and you can see that you can edit whether the person can view it or will be able to edit it. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it looks like when you're looking at a document. Robin, I think you were going to talk a little bit more about how you might access SharePoint and what we would recommend.
This is what a hub looks like. This is where you would actually go to access the various sites on your SharePoint. For instance, this one is showing where you could click on each of these buttons, which are links to human resources or information technology or workplace. But yes, this is like
the intranet. This is part of it.
This is an example of
basically using SharePoint as an intranet. They, in this particular case, for example, this organization plays their human resources communication site. They also have an information technology site, which is the IT, and they have another place that is called Workplace. So they basically are creating into their SharePoint a little piece of intranet, but soon you will see the integration with SharePoint. Okay, that's exactly what you're seeing right there.
Exactly. And then we also, because Microsoft always has 20 ways to do anything. So this is an example again from me. When I was saving this PowerPoint, I got to, you can choose which folder you're going to save it in and where you're going to put that. So just like your File Explorer, but it's the shared folders. Okay, So now we're going to talk a little bit more about OneDrive and shared libraries in SharePoint. And it's really, really confusing. And I think we got several questions about this in the registration questions. So Robin, did you want to take on a little bit talking about kind of how we think about where you should share something or store something and what our recommendations are?
Right. People make personal decisions and departments do their own thing. If people are using the personal OneDrive or Google Personal to store their documents for the organization that they share the folder, we address the organizing to set up rules. Everything on your company laptop belongs to your company, but your personal documents are stored in OneDrive, which is your personal slice of SharePoint. SharePoint are documents that are shared amongst you and your department or across the entire organization. Teams is a method, an app that we can use to access SharePoint as well.
And I know you talked about it previously, like when you think about what you're storing in OneDrive and whether they're actually personal documents, like you have to think about should you be storing personal documents on your work laptop? And so that's like a little bit of a separate question. But yeah, I think that's a great way to keep it straight. So your OneDrive is yours, but you can share those files with other people from your OneDrive. So again, it's like Microsoft gives you 20 different ways to do the same thing, and it can make it really seem a lot more complicated. Let's move on and talk about more about the lingo. So there's some common SharePoint, lingo that again might be a little bit confusing. So Robin, did you want to talk about just the way we talk about SharePoint?
Yes. So as Carolyn alluded to earlier, a lot of the lingo is related or sounds a lot like websites. So SharePoint is made up of sites. A site is a storage space in the SharePoint storage system, the Microsoft storage system. And you can have two types of sites, Teams sites or communication sites. The Teams site is not in Teams. Teams is a separate app. Thanks a lot to Microsoft for making that confusing. But a Teams site is one that is for collaboration. A group is a collection of users who have access to a site. If you create the group or if you create the site, the group automatically is created that gives access to that site.
So I think in that screenshot that we showed earlier with the hub, and you had the 3 different areas, there was an HR area, an IT area, and a workplace area. So each of those are sites. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right.
They each lead to sites that have the permissions set for who has access to that site.
And so each of those sites would have a group associated with it. So like if you were in HR, everyone in the HR group would have access to everything in that HR site, that you would go to that start page and then click on HR site, and then it would show you all the folders.
Right.
Some more lingo, Robin.
Yes. So that slide, referring to the slide that we discussed, was a hub. It's a special communication site that's used to navigate to other sites. If you are just starting out with SharePoint, you will be probably creating multiple sites, and this is a way to collect them all together and point to where those sites are. The screenshot from earlier is an example. It often is the start page, and your SharePoint may or may not have a hub. For just a couple of sites, you would not need a hub. A documents library is a container that stores files. Within the library are files and folders, just like in your File Explorer on your computer or Finder on your Mac. Permissions can be set at the file level by folder and by site. Permissions should be defined by the governance team. We recommend that members of sites have access to to all the content on that site. It's a cleaner implementation.
And I know we talked a little bit earlier about when we were preparing for this webinar about like when that might come into play. Like before we showed that there was the HR site. So you might have a team like within HR that has even more specialized permissions, like some documents that can only be seen by certain people in HR. So you're saying that you wouldn't want to create different permission levels within that HR site. How would you handle that?
So if you have a folder that has just a handful of the members of that site that have access to just that folder, we recommend that you create a new site for that folder out of that folder.
So some examples of that, like for your board maybe, or for like
yes, for board content. Yeah.
Could it potentially be like one person in HR that has like special access that they need and they would have a site to themselves?
Yes, we often find this type of situation in finance folders where payroll information may be in the finance folder, but you would not want everybody to have access. So you should create a payroll site that is only those folks that need access to payroll information.
That makes sense. I think when you think about it that way, it can make it more simple. It's a simpler, like you said, a cleaner implementation. So now we have a couple of frequently asked questions. So I'm going to kind of ask you to give us a little bit of insight in this. So Norwin, can you do a migration without consultants? We got this question in registration.
Short answer is yes, but we have an advice for you. So if someone use someone internally or externally with experience with migrations who knows SharePoint well. Make sure the managers prioritize SharePoint time and recognize this is a big, important project. This is our best recommendation to you. So it's doable, but make sure that you have somebody who knows.
Yeah, so you need someone who's responsible for it.
Correct.
Over time, like not just for the migration, but then they're also going to be kind of managing as it goes forward.
Responsible, and also is empowered in the organization to make, the work, because you can have somebody that has the project on their workload, but if the person is not empowered, nothing is going to happen.
That makes sense. All right. So when should you keep using a physical file server, Robin?
Rarely. Cloud-based file sharing has become the standard and has economic and business advantages. It's also greener.
That's true. That's true. Yep. So is SharePoint in the cloud expensive, and is a migration expensive, Norwin?
Okay, moving to the cloud makes sense, right? Financially speaking, you will have a one-time cost and easier access versus the cost for server licenses and complicated access security via VPN. And also remember, physical servers have a life cycle. So after 5-6 years, you need to replace them. Replace them mean you need to pay for engineers to do the configuration, and then you gotta recycle that device, and also you have to purchase new licenses. So if you add up all those numbers every 5 years, it makes more sense to go to SharePoint, because SharePoint is less. Basically, you don't pay for SharePoint because it's included in your licensing that you are getting. If you want extra, then you pay extra.
Yeah, now I think that's a good reason for a lot of nonprofits to be using it, because they already have Office 365, so it's included in that. All right, a couple more frequently asked questions. So my organization doesn't have standardized file sharing now. Should we migrate? Robin, what do you think?
Ad hoc file sharing by different departments is an indication to your migration that your migration will need strong change management and strong training to get everybody on the same page.
So I think it might even be like an indication that, yes, you should migrate. Like if you're going to organize your files anyway, you might as well use a migration to kind of prod that. So Norwin, is simplicity and consistency better in SharePoint organization?
I think it is, yes. Over engineering is a recipe for frustration and inefficiency. So we have to keep it simple. And the way to keep it simple is because SharePoint basically is similar to what you use when you use your file explorer. So you can have that sense of the same way of doing things. You know what I mean? You don't add an extra layer of knowledge to people. You just need to explain them. This is the way it works, similar to this one, and it will be much simpler.
Yeah, no. And is SharePoint secure? Robin, do you want to address that?
Yes, following Microsoft's built-in security features within the security and compliance stack, SharePoint is secure. Your logins are already in place, so you should use multi-factor authentication and single sign-on to access it. User training is key to keeping SharePoint secure. User training would include or should include keeping track of how you share documents and who you have shared them with. Any system can be insecure, and with strong training and change management, a single SharePoint is always more secure than multiple sites. That gets into trying to manage and keep track of many different sites and their access.
Exactly. And I loved earlier when you were talking about the permissions being by site, and then you have a group that all have the same permissions. So not trying to manage lots of different permissions at different levels, like just having the site be the organizer for the permissions. That also makes a lot of sense. Now we have, like our cybersecurity expert, Matt, is always saying that any system could be insecure. Like if you share your password with somebody, then, the system could be as secure as possible, but it comes down to the people being able to use it securely. All right, so that was great. We've got a bunch of questions coming in. I'm going to hold them, so we're going to make sure that we have some time at the end to answer questions because we want to make sure that we get through the case study. But right now I wanted to go ahead and launch this another poll to let people in the audience tell us, where are you migrating from? So are you migrating from a physical file server? You're finally getting off and going in the cloud. Second option, are you migrating from a single other cloud file platform? Are you migrating from multiple other cloud file platforms? Are you migrating from multiple SharePoints to a single SharePoint? Are you, it can get more and more complicated, right? Are you migrating from multiple offices with multiple platforms to a single SharePoint? Number 6 is maybe something else, or all of the above, a little bit of everything. And the 7th option that you can give us is not applicable. So I'm going to share the results. And Norwin, can you read that for us?
Yes, I can. Physical servers, we have 10 people with physical servers still. Single other cloud platform, we have 6, which is 18%. Multiple other cloud file platforms, which is 12%, 0. And the next one, and the multiple SharePoint to single SharePoint. Multiple offices to multiple platform to a single SharePoint, that's a 0 too. And then something else, we have 29%, 10. And then 4 people and not applicable.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe you're thinking about it or it's down the road. So Correct. Thank you again for sharing all of that with us. All right, so next I'm going to move on to the case study part. The mission of the Chinatown Community Development Center is to build community and enhance the quality of life for San Francisco residents. It was begun in 1977 from 5 neighborhood grassroots organizations that were advocating for parks, housing, tenant rights, transportation, and recreation needs. And Chinatown CDC today provides multiple services and advocates for multiple neighborhood issues. They are at the forefront of community advocacy, planning, and affordable housing development in the city of San Francisco. So if you look at their website today, which I urge you to do, they're a phenomenal, amazing organization doing a lot of really wonderful things, but that's it. They're doing a lot of things. They provide lots of different services, and like many nonprofits, their teams are going in lots of different directions. This can be an asset, as many of the issues they're working on are interconnected. But it has also created a situation where many departments and teams don't necessarily coordinate organization-wide, particularly around where they were sharing their files and how they were storing them. So this is very, very common to many nonprofits. Not surprisingly, they experienced rapid budget and staff growth during the pandemic as they were called on to help their community through that crisis. The rapid growth and the shift to working remotely helped them decide that their file sharing needed to be consolidated and simplified. And again, I just emphasize that many of the challenges they experience are common to other nonprofits of any size. And we hope that this webinar will help you feel like you're not alone, and SharePoint can be really, really challenging. All right, so Norwin, I think you wanted to help walk us through some of the challenges that they face.
Yes, but before talking about the challenges, I want to say that in 2022, CCDC, I call it CCDC, Chinatown CDC, realized they needed to create a common file sharing system organization-wide, as they were already using SharePoint, the classic version, because SharePoint has a classic version, and they were using that. And they have Microsoft 365. They selected SharePoint as their common platform to contract it, and then contracted Community IT to do the migration. So we are helping them in the migration. So basically, this organization is so big that only one department can consider an organization, because you can have one department with like 40 people in one department, and then in different places, which is almost one organization. So the challenges they experience might sound familiar to some of you, and I'm going to try to go through them really quick, right? Experience rapid budget and staff growth during the pandemic. At the same time, they have moved to remote work, and they needed access, right? And they have something very secure to access the server. So we were facing that challenge. And the moment that we saw that, we said, you know what, the best way to go is move to SharePoint to everyone. And they already had SharePoint. So it was more of plan the training, plan the migration, right? Then they have multiple locations. They have multiple departments. They have multiple file sharing platforms, including SharePoint, file server, and also Dropbox. And who knows what else? They might have, their Gmail. Some people are using their Gmail to the Google Drive to share files as well. So it's very complex situation, right? They also have multiple sites within SharePoint, which is make it more complex, right? Because we have right now in the migration, we have the current people who's moving, and there is some people who still using the other version of SharePoint. So you have like two different systems working at the same time, which is no ideal to nobody, but we have to move them smoothly because they're so big, right? So there is a lack of existence, governance, rules, and documentation, because when they started doing this, it was only one department using SharePoint. So that department took the lead to move to SharePoint, use SharePoint, but there was never a governance on it. So they basically created their own space to collaborate and work. So this was a challenge, because we need to face the challenge and then give them a solution to that one. So they have different teams, departments, and they have free reign to create a file sharing option. Change management was essential to bring them together to make decisions organization-wide. And then obviously multiple previous consultants and soil decision-making without common coordination. This happens easily in larger organizations. So if your organization is big, maybe you can be like check almost in every single one of them, So that's
I think even some smaller organizations might have some of these same challenges, where you have entrepreneurial people who have like chosen a file sharing that works for them or their department, and then trying to get everybody on a similar same platform can be really, really challenging. So do you want to talk a little bit, Norwin, about the steps for any migration?
Yes, correct. So this is something really interesting, because we're trying to make it simple for you to see it in the presentation, but in reality, it's a lot of moving pieces in there. Like, for example, the assessment is that we consider the first step, which is multiple one-on-one meetings with the department leads. So before you get into that moment of the assessment, you got to make sure that you have the right person for the department to take the leadership of moving and making decisions. So that's what's happening. So, for example, I'm going to give you an example. You have finance team, right? There might be somebody in finance who is the most competent person to make that work, but basically that person is completely busy. But you can have a second person who has the knowledge and also can help with the migration. We need somebody to guide internally your department and also help us, because we are the team helping you to move the files. But we need to understand that when we move the files to the new location, we don't make a mistake. So everything has to be really, really clear. And that leads us to the next step, which is design and planning. So we need to consolidate a new structure, and then we have to have an agreement, and then we have to have a migration plan, meaning like, okay, we are ready to migrate. We know how it is. Every single folder goes from here to here, here to here, here to here. But also they know when is the day that the files are not going to be longer accessible, because when we do the migration, like for example, we usually do migrations on Friday. So Fridays, 5 p.m., nobody can have access to the system because we're going to move the files. So basically we cut off any single access to the people, so they are not working. We have some people who's workaholic, and even though we tell them 5 p.m., they keep working 6, 7, 8 p.m., they're still on the server doing changes. So we tell them 5 p.m., then we migrate. And then we say, Monday morning, first thing we do is train you. So we're going to train you. We're going to explain you where your files move. And that is the next step, the migration. Agree on the days that we're going to train you, and obviously migrate everything. And then the post-migration thing, which is support, right? If there is somebody who say, I don't have access to my files, I lost my file, where are they? We can help you because we know where they are. We made a mapping at the beginning, knowing this folder goes here and it moves here. This folder goes here and moves here. So we know exactly where your files are. And also we can provide you support. We can help you to find your files. And also we don't delete anything. We don't delete any files. So we just remove access and we leave it as a read only. So you can see what it is in there, but you cannot touch it, you cannot modify it. And then if something needs to be moved, we help you and we move it. In a very simplex way. This is more complex than it looks.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.